Okay, Susan, so you all set? If so, I'll give you a brief introduction. Um, I think we often give the Bartlett Lecture a choice whether you would like to have questions at the end or not. Do you have feelings about
I
that?
hope that I've tried very hard to make this talk 45 minutes and have time for questions,
Right,
but I often underestimate. But I hope to have time for questions.
right. Okay, well, it's time for me to invite Professor Susan Carey, who's co-founder of the Harvard Laboratory for Development Studies, to give the 48th Bartlett Lecture. Susan Carey's program is built around these kind of remarkable features of human concepts. So we do have concepts like cats and dogs, but we also have so much more than that, many of which we've been hearing about this afternoon, including logical concepts like or and implies, mathematical concepts like more and infinity, um, properties of sets, and so on. And Susan Carey's program has dealt head on with all the richness and structure of this conceptual structure, its development in children and across cultures, um, and within culture. Her programs had really extraordinary breadth, dealing with infant development, non-human primates, inputs from philosophy, from history, and combining the ideas of the innate building blocks that children come into the world with, and then conceptual bootstrapping to produce complex structures during development. It's quite common in introductions of this sort to list the speaker's awards. In this case, I'm not going to do that because once you started, it would be hard to know where to stop. I'll just mention perhaps the most recent, which is the Atkinson Award from the National Academy of Sciences in 2020. And just take it from me that otherwise it's everything that you could think of and probably some that you wouldn't, including the Ottawa Township High School Hall of Fame 2009. Um, I was, to finish with a personal note, privileged about 2004 or so, I suppose, to hear Susan Carey on the subject of how adult conceptions of number developed from and are built out of two pre-existing simpler systems, an approximate number sense that follows Weber's law and a representation of exact numbers which is restricted to small numbers. And what I remember from this is sitting there with a sense of basically awed delight at the brilliance of the analysis that Susan presented. I'm very much looking forward to repeating that experience today in her talk on the ontogenetic origin of the capacity for logically structured thought, the case study of the logical connectives or not impossible.
First, I want to thank you very much for the Bartlett Award. I mean, I am very moved by being given this award. I am old enough so that when I was taught Introduction to Experimental Psychology, it was mainly all psychophysics and behaviorism, but there was a little section on this work by this British psychologist who was doing really new work about the constructive nature of memory. And I don't think I would have stayed in the field if that had not been part of that course. So I think it's just, I'm very pleased to be awarded an award with the that was itself honoring that particular British psychologist. And I also want to thank the panelists in the symposium prior. That these are people all that whose work has influenced me greatly. Okay, so what does this talk about? So ever since Descartes, philosophers have argued that the capacity for logically structured thought is unique to linguistically competent humans. Okay. So besides Descartes, more modern thinkers are philosophers like Donald Davidson and Jose Bermudez. And then there are other philosophers who argue the contrary. Jerry Fodor, who claims that logically structured thought, a language of thought, must be available to all behaviors, all animals capable of complex behavior, at least down to insects. Now, this is not an issue that's going to be solved by a priori arguments in the philosophical, from the philosophical armchair. It's a scientific issue. And like all scientific issues, there's a theoretical component to that. What's the nature of the kind of thought we're talking about? What's the nature of logically structured thought? And so there's lots of properties of it. These thoughts bear truth values. They express propositions. They have abstract primitives, and they're formulated over non-iconic symbols, and they support deductive and inductive inferences. Inferences that depend upon deductive inferences depend on logical form at all. It's wildly combinatorial, both within propositions and the capacity to recursively create propositions that have propositions as proper parts. So natural language has all those properties. So we know humans have the capacity for such thought. But how will we study the philosophers' alternative hypotheses that this form of thought is not only uniquely human, it's only emerges in ontogenesis with the learning of language. To do that, we have to be able to study aspects of this kind of thought in non-human creatures. Now, look, the language of thought has many properties, and non-linguistic thought of one sort or another may have some of those properties, but not others. So we have to proceed case study by case study. The case studies that I'm going to do, this is just an extension of Joseph Call's talk, right? Are the case study of the logical connectives not, or, and possible? And to study that, you have to start somewhere. So you start with a face valid task, a task that on its face, success might depend upon representations with the properties of logically. Whoops, what happened here? Logically structured thought. So the case study is the disjunctive syllogism. So this is relevant to Luca Bonatti's infant study and also the call cup task. I am going to develop my whole argument about the call cup task because it illustrates, I think, exactly the same kinds of points that Joseph was illustrating. And I want to show you how it plays out in ontogenesis. So this is the face valid task, right? This is the version that we do with infants and young children.
Yeah, and then I can hold you. Yeah, Mom has to hold on. I know, this is less exciting.
Oh, are you ready? Okay, look where it's going. Okay, Eamon, look at this. And look at this. All right, where's the ball? Can you find the ball? Oh,
that's a child who failed, right?
There it is.
Okay. So when you have a face valid task like this, where success would be going to the one that's empty, you, just as Joseph illustrated so beautifully, you then have to rule out deflationary explanations of the behavior that you see. You have to rule out deflationary explanations of the successes. So they might be succeeding, but not drawing on the logical representations that you think they are. So the logical representations are here is that there's a location ambiguity here, and the child is thinking the ball could be in the left bucket or the ball could be in the right bucket, and then when you show them it's empty, that's the A or B premise. Empty is it's not there, so they eliminate that option and they deduce that it's in the other. That's the logical representation, but as Joseph says, there's many other potential explanations. So you have to rule out that they could be succeeding on a different basis. But if they fail, as that child who was 15 months old did, you have to rule out that the failure isn't due to some performance demands of this task that mask the competence that they have. So as Joseph showed us, this task is passed by many, 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 many animals of many, many different species. And it's also, Hill et al. Showed that human children succeed from age 3 on up. Now, 3-year-olds are irrelevant to the Descartes question, since 3-year-olds are hyper linguistic creatures, as anybody who knows a 3-year-old knows. So why are we not done? Tomasella, referring to the success in animals, argues that the capacity for logically structured thoughts is not one of the capacities that divides non-humans from humans. But to accept that conclusion just on the basis of the success of this task would be premature, because the question is there some other way you can do it? Okay, so here's the roadmap of what I'm going to do. I'm going to show you that children do not draw on representations of or in location disambiguation tasks until beginning at age 4. If that's true, if children are not drawing on a premise, it could be in the left one or it could be in the right one, then the success on this task is not the disjunctive syllogism, right? I'm going to then argue that that failure derives from the absence of the modal operator possibly, which gives you would also give you a representation sufficient. If you represent it's possibly in A and it's possibly in B, and furthermore, it's in one of them, right? Then that's equivalent to or. And the problem is the absence of the modal operator possibly, I'm going to argue. And furthermore, I'm then going to argue that children do not draw on representations of the negation operator needed for option elimination. The not in the disjunctive syllogism in this task until ages 17 to 19 months. Okay. So rather than talking about the alternative interpretations in terms of strategies and associations, you can also ask what's the structure of the inference in each of these things. So the disjunctive syllogism is the top there, that you're actually setting up, you're asking yourself a question, you're representing a constrained search space. That's one of the logical functions of OR, but OR does more than that. It specifies a relation between those two possibilities. So you're representing logical OR, and you're representing not, and you're drawing the conclusion. But you could also get success if you've constrained the search space. That's part of the logical function of OR. You've constrained the search space to the two buckets, and you eliminate an option upon showing it to be empty. That's a representation of not. But there's no, you haven't updated the probability that it's in the other one, but you search there nonetheless because you've eliminated the other option, right? So that if you just have an attentional capacity that constrains the search space to the buckets, and you have option elimination on the basis of not, then you will succeed on this task, but it wouldn't have been the disjunctive syllogism. Okay, the reason that I chose the location disambiguation task for this case study is that in the developmental literature, this is the only case study of face valid tasks that might reflect a disjunctive syllogism where people have tried to decide between these options. And this goes back just as Joseph started with Piaget invisible displacement, the first attempt to look for deductive certainty was based on Piagetian invisible displacement. And so the two species were, the two set of participants were 5-year-old children and dogs. And look, we have no way of knowing whether the probability a participant assigns to a conclusion as 1 is the probability of 1 from behavioral data alone, I think. But we can look for something weaker. Evidence that learning the location is empty increases the probability that the toy will be found in the others. So what the children or the dog saw here is an experimenter with a toy or a piece of food shown at the beginning, walking behind screen 1, walking behind screen 2, walking behind screen 3, and then shown the hand empty. Okay, and then the creatures were allowed to search, and both species searched behind the screens, going from one to the other. And what they looked at was, in cases where they don't find the food until screen 3, do you see evidence that after they've eliminated the options of screen 1 and screen 2, they go faster to screen 3 because this is a reflection of having drawn an inference and settled that it must be there. And the children did, and the dogs did not. The dogs just extinguished looking behind screens, whereas the children showed the signature of at least increasing the probability that it's in the third screen as a result of it's not being found in screens 1 and 2. Now, this is not going to answer a question about children and all animals, or even non-linguistic children, because these are 5-year-olds. But I mentioned this because this was the first attempt to try to do this. And now I want to actually, we want younger children, and we want animals evolutionarily closer to us. So here is a paper by Colin Carpenter, which was really about certainty versus uncertainty. And so what this task is, the experimenter baits one of these tubes, either where the subject can't see where it's baited or the subject can see where it's baited. Then the subject, either a chimpanzee or a 2.5-year-old, gets a chance to try to find the object. And they can look in the tube if they want to before they choose a tube. It's a little hard to worry the thing out. So so the question is, are they more likely to look when they didn't see where it was than when they did? And the answer is yes. Both animals, both kinds of animals, very robustly are more likely to look in the unseen condition than the seen condition. So this was not about the disjunctive syllogism, but they had some trials with the same structure as Watson, the Watson and Gergely results, where there were 3 tubes, and over many trials where the baiting was unseen, both individuals of both species have looked into 2 of the 3 and seen them that they are empty before they come to the third one. And the question is, they reach without looking when they know where it is on the basis of seeing. Do they reach without looking when it's the result of a putative deductive inferences? Now, as again, this experiment wasn't designed to test that, but they had a couple hundred trials of both types or both species. And I read the data, but I would welcome a correction if I'm wrong about this, as a spectacular failure to find evidence of deductive certainty, because on only 20% of the trials or so, that where they've ruled out A and B and they could deduce C, do they actually search without looking, as compared to well over 50% when they've seen it there. But more importantly, they also search without looking on about 20% of trials when they have insufficient evidence, that they've looked at only one or none, and they search one without looking. So there's just no evidence for dogs, chimps, or 2.5-year-olds that they are even updating the probability of where the thing is on the basis of, and certainly not to certainty, the kind of certainty you get from seeing where it is, on the basis of a disjunctive syllogism. Okay. Our task was also, Joseph talked about this task. Our task was designed to get at the same question. This is Shilpa Modi's work. We had practice trials where you're competing against a competitor, and you get one chance to try to get the sticker. And the practice trials were always also training trials. So the competitor did it first, and they talked through their reasoning. So here, the practice trials, there's no inference here. There's no show empty. But you hide a sticker in a set of two, and you hide a sticker in a singleton cup. And so if you're representing the probabilities here and the disjunctive relation, the probability should be 50% chances of stickers in each of the doubleton set and 100% in the other. And the experimenter who gets to go first says, well, I can be sure there's one in this cup, pointing to the blue cup, because there was only one cup there. And so the sticker had to go in there. Whereas here it could be in this one or this one. So I only get one choice. I'm going to choose this one. Okay, so there it was, just making the structure of this as clear as we could make, and also modeling that it's a competitive game. And so we have data on the training trials, what the child did on the 3-cup trials, as well as the performance on the 4-cup trials that Joseph told you about, which the difference is now there's two sets of 2. So when all is revealed here, there's a 50% chance of a sticker in each of those cups. And then you show them one is empty, and that turns if you're making it a deductive inference, that turns the 4-cup task into the 3-cup task. So you've now got a choice between 100% and 2 50/50s. Okay, so what do we find? In the 3-cup practice trials, all children are better than chance, in the sense of chance being 33%. There's 3 cups there, and they are choosing the certain option more than chance. And we took that as evidence that even the 2.5-year-olds understood the task. I mean, their performance is data. I actually want to very explicitly take away that interpretation. And you're going to see why. But what's notable here is the 2.5-year-olds and the 3-year-olds are choosing the certain option only not significantly different from half the time. Okay, so that's not chance, because if you've eliminated option, there's 3 cups to choose between, and the children never at this age look in the empty cup. But it's not what an adult would do. If these were $1,000 bills, if there is $1,000 bill, and I hid one in the singleton cup and 1 in the Doubleton cups, and you only got one choice, every single adult would choose, of course, the certain option. Okay. So what happened on the 4-cup trials? Well, the 2-year-olds completely failed to show any evidence of updating the probability. They chose 33%, 33%, 33%. And the 3, 4, and 5-year-olds do better than chance, where chance is 33%. But again, they're lousy. And you put these side by side, what you see is that the performance on the 3-cup trials and the 4-cup trials are essentially identical from age 3 and 4 on. And we made a big deal in that paper of the difference for the 2.5-year-olds of failing on the 4-cup task and succeeding better than chance. But in fact, these are not statistically different from each other, and this utter failure doesn't replicate. So I want to show you what the true, these data now have been replicated many, many times, and the pattern is very clear. The pattern is this. I want you to look at these data. The 2.5 and 3-year-olds do not choose the certain option significantly more than 50% of the time. So these are our data. This is an exact replication of by a group, Patricia Gagne and I forget Grigioğlu's first name. And you see the 2.5-year-olds are choosing the certain option, and the 3-cup task not different from 50%, or in the 4-cup task. That's the 2.5-year-olds, and the 3.5-year-olds are better, but they're still not better than 50%. Okay. So in both the 3-cup task and the 4-cup task, the children are failing to distinguish a probability of 1 from a probability of 50-50. But there's no, but they are excluding the option, right? Okay. This is a spectacular failure to the represent or if you're not deriving the probability of 50-50 from it. But there's a possible deflationary account here, right, of the failure, right? So this task makes very high information processing demands, high executive function demands. You have to remember these 2 acts of hiding, right? And then you have to update your working memory. You have to hold 2 working memory models in mind at once, and you have to update them when you're shown the empty one. So you have to inhibit in the 4-cup task the tendency perhaps to go to the one that's been manipulated. So maybe performance demands are masking a competence, the competence that the experiment Luca with 12-month-olds showed you. That's very much there in non-linguistic thought already in children. Well, if that's right, then if we remove those information processing demands, but keep the structure of the task constant, you should find success at a much younger age. And so, I mean, we thought that was a very likely possibility. So we designed the following task. We remove working memory altogether. We make the task predictive, and everything is visible at the moment when you make your choice. So what we're going to do is hold a marble here and a marble here at the same time. We're going to drop them at the same time. And your job is to put the cup under the exit where you're sure to catch a marble. Because if you catch a marble, you get to put it in this jingle box here, which has a xylophone. These are metal marbles, and it has a xylophone in it and makes a wonderful sound, and the kids find this extremely fun. I am going to make a plug for the Bath University internship program. So these experiments, almost all of them were undergraduate dissertations at Bath from Bath interns in my lab. So this was Brian Leahy and Anna Holliday's idea. So you can see this task had the same structure as the 3-cup task. And the question is the right answer. Oh, that's the 3-cup. The right answer, of course, is to put the cup underneath the single exit, because it's certain to come out there. And here it's a 50-50 probability. No working memory, no epistemic difference between the state of knowledge of the experimenter and the child. Many factors could play a role in making the cups version of this task hard. So this is the analog. An analog to the 2-cup task is we put a blocker in here and then ask where the child puts the cup, and they put it here. And we can also have trials where we show them in advance where we're going to put a blocker, but make them choose where they're going to put the slide before we put the blocker in. And 2.5-year-olds solve this problem perfectly fine. So they understand the structure of the task. Okay, so this is the equivalent of the 3-cups task, and this is the equivalent of the 4-cups task. So you have one place to put the cup. There's this blocker. Where would you put it? And again, this is 100% chance of it's coming out, and these are 50-50. Okay, so the question is, does taking away all of those information processing demands that come from working memory and updating working memory change the pattern of results? And the long story is short is not one iota. Okay, the 2-year-olds are choosing the certain option exactly 50% of the time, and not different from 50% of the time on the 4-option task. 3-year-olds also, you can see those distributions are, again, not different from 50s, but better than the 2.5-year-olds. And the 4-year-olds, there is a difference, but they're better on the cups than the slides. Okay, so the conclusion here is that we moved the information processing demands due to working memory and absolutely did not change the pattern. So what difficulty is there common between the 2 tasks? So what I think these data support is that these children are constraining their search to just the exits or just the cups. They're not looking in the experimenter's hands or in the corner of the room. Okay, so their attention, due to training and attentional mechanisms, has limited the search to those 2. And there's a representation of a goal, namely finding the sticker or catching the marble. And there's elimination of an option shown to be empty, but there's no deductive certainty and no premise involving or. Okay. Now I want to turn down to our evidence that this failure derives from the absence of a modal operator, possibly. Maybe, again, I'm only showing a failure to draw on a modal operator, possibly, which is very weak evidence that they don't have it, but consistent with that. Okay, so what does a modal operator possibly do for you? It allows you to represent 2 alternative possibilities for a single reality. There's no problem for the child to contain multiple models in mind at once. I mean, in the Lisa Feigenson bucket choice task, for example, you put 3 stickers in one bucket and 2 stickers in the other. The child has a model of both, 2 models, one of each container, and the total number of stickers represented there as 5, that exceeds their working memory capacity for a single model, but they not only can represent those two, but they can then compare them according to which has more. So it's not that they can't represent multiple models, but what a modal operator does is allow you to represent more than one possibility for a single state of affairs at the same time. So just as there's a just as there's a protological sense of or, which is constraining a search space without representing the relation between the two options, so there is a protological sense of possibility. So anytime a creature makes a prediction, they are in fact representing a possibility. So suppose I ask you, where will it come out in this Y-shaped slides thing? If you can run a simulation and show that there's nothing that would prevent it from coming out here. So you could answer, it could come out the left one. That prediction is only a possibility from our experimenter point of view, because it hasn't happened yet. But it need not be marked as a mere possibility for the child, by the child, right? So is that a representation of a possibility? Sure. That is, it's a representation of a state of affairs that hasn't happened yet. So it is a representation of a possibility. But the representational system might treat it as an actuality, right? Not distinguish between it will come out there and it might come out there. Whereas if you have the modal concept possibility, you can say it might come out the left and it might come out the right, right? So now, and you could represent this with language-like representations or mental models where you represent both simulations, but you have to mark them some way different from black, right? You have to mark this to use a representation of this kind of format to represent possibility. You would have to mark these two simulations as on equal footing. Right? So what modal representations allow you to do is represent two alternative possibilities at the same time, which can then be a basis of action planning. I mean, they're really important. And this task is an these action planning tasks. So the hypothesis is that young children certainly have representations of possibility in this minimal sense. They make predictions. But you can explain I'm going back to this, the 50-50 choice between the certain option and one of the 2-cup options on both the 3-cup task and the 4-cup task as a choice. The child on the uncertain child ran a simulation or made a guess and treated the output of that as reality. It's the same status as they did a simulation of where it would go, where it went in the 1-cup or the 1-channel task too. And they're choosing between 2 options of equal status. That predicts the 50-50 performance that we get on 2.5-year-olds and 3-year-olds on these tasks. Now, yes, so the minimal solution, doing a simulation or a guess and then treating it as reality, predicts the behavior you have. But boy, predicting 50-50, that's not, you can't really write home about predicting 50-50. So to test this, that this is what is actually happening, we want a task where the minimal solution predicts 100% of some choice, right? And so we did a task that's very similar in its spirit to the penultimate task that Joseph presented in his talk. But here's our version. And this is an experiment by Matt Steele, who was a Bath intern with Brian and Michael Humer and me. And we just changed the task from, this is the same standard 3 cups task. Hide a single coin in one pirate chest, hide another coin in a set of 2 pirate chests. But instead of saying, you only have one choice, which one do you want? We say, okay, you can throw away a chest and keep everything that's left. All right. Now, what would a minimal possibility person do? Well, they would simulate there's a coin in the certain chest. They would simulate the coin in one of the other 2 chests, and then they would throw away the remaining one that is empty, right? So this predicts, the minimal representation here predicts throwing away from the two chest side 100% of the time. And what are the data? There are 8 trials, and the modal, in the sense of statistically modal thing, is children throw away from the uncertain side 8 out of 8 times, and the overall probability of doing so is almost 90%. So this is absolutely not 50-50 performance. So this rules out certain low-level interpretations of the 50-50 performance. They aren't just choosing a side or choosing a coin in advance or just, forgetting all about what's happened here. But stop. I hope you're following me. This is what adults would do as well, of course, right? If you did have modal representations, you represent wait a minute, we've gone ahead. We represent 100% probability here, 50% probability each here, so you better throw away one of these. So maybe just doing throwaway has brought out modal representations that kids have. So how do we decide between those? Well, this is another undergraduate dissertation, this case a Harvard student, not a Bath intern. She sets it up the same way. First, they throw away one, and that's just a replication of the previous one. Hide one here, hide one here. You have one chance to throw away one. They always choose one from the uncertain size, and that goes back and has a big X over it so they can remember which one they wrote. And now the question is, you only get one choice. Which chest do you want to open? Okay, so if the reason they threw away from the uncertain side was they actually represented the 50-50 probability that can be derived from representations of either or possibility, then they have a choice between a 50% and 100%, and they should choose this, right, the 100% one. One reason to doubt that and to think that our minimal representation story was right was one child who narrated what he was doing when he 8 out of 8 times threw away from the Doubleton chest. 8 out of 8 times he said, well, there's one in this one. Well, there's one in this one. So this one's empty, so I'm throwing it away. Okay, that is the minimal representation of possibility story. But if that's the case, when you're now making a choice between these two, you're choosing between 2 options of equal commitment to actuality. So what happens in the, what do you choose? Okay, so here's the probability of a wise choice in the throwaway case, replicating Matt Steele's, the Bath interns finding that they overwhelmingly choose throwing away from the doubleton. But when they get to choose from which one to choose, 50-50. Okay, so I think that these last experiments provide very strong evidence for minimal representations of possibility underlying performance on these tasks. There's no evidence for representations of reasoning in terms of or of possible being deployed in these tasks by age 3. At age 3. By age 4, children are providing evidence of modal representations of possibility, but not yet at the adult level. So it's beginning at the end of age 3 and the beginning of 4. Okay, so these data, this is the end of what I'm going to use the call cup task to argue for. So these data provide strong support from my first two premises that they're not deploying representations of or in these tasks or of possibility, modal concepts of possibility. But rather they're doing one successful simulation or making one guess and treating it as reality. But does this mean they lack symbols for modal operators altogether, or they're just not deploying them here? So one place to look for that, these are very verbal kids. They've been using modal language. They say maybe and I can or I can't. Do I have to? They've been using those words since they're 2. If they've analyzed those words in an adult way, then they must have the concepts, right? They're just not deploying them in these tasks. So we use the same task to get at this. We use the slides task as a window on a comprehension of the modal language. So we could hold a marble over here and I say, if I drop the marble in here, does it have to come out here? Does it have to come out here? Can it come out here? Can it come out here? Similarly, I'm not going to show you the data here. If I hold the marble here, children all say it can come out here, and they say it has to come out here. But here is where the pattern for can and have to diverge. It can come out here, it can come out here, but it doesn't have to come out here, and it doesn't have to come out here. So when do they show they've analyzed can and have to in a way that distinguish possibility from necessity? Okay. So this is a complicated graph, but because it shows all the data, but I'll talk through that. They answer the can questions correctly. So correct is they say yes to both. They say yes, it can come out here. Yes, it can come out here. Okay, but 4-year-olds answer have to. The modal response is the same one, right? They say it has to come out here and it has to come out here. You can answer can with successive simulations, and they absolutely are not distinguishing at age 4. They're beginning, right? It's beginning at age 4. We don't have 3-year-olds in these data yet, but it's not until 7 that they give the adult answers of saying no, it doesn't have to come out here, or they correct you and say it might, right? So these two responses are the adult responses, and you have them completely by age 7. But there's no evidence that the children have analyzed the distinction between possibly and necessary, which requires the explicit modals. And notice this is the same age. Okay, 4-year-olds are beginning to do so, right? This is significantly different. 4-year-olds are also beginning to prepare their choices on the basis of alternative possibilities. Okay, but this might underestimate the child's understanding as well. One problem is they might be answering the question, does it have to come out here eventually, right? I mean, they might have turned the question to a different question. And so you can get at whether they have modal concepts in a linguistic context by other ways than actually seeing whether they've analyzed the modals. So can they quantify over possibilities? So I'm going to drop this marble here right now. Is this the only place for this marble to come out? Is this the only place for this marble to come out? Similarly, you can do this on this slide. I'm going to drop this marble here. Please point to all the places this marble could come out. I'm going to drop it here. Please point to all the marble that this could come out. Okay. And what we found is that, yes, part of the problem in the other one was due to not making this clear. First this. On the single side, they answer all these questions correctly. They say this is the only place it can come out, and this is all the places it can come out, right? But here's, again, it's this side that's interesting. And only half of the 4-year-olds are answering the only questions correct. They say, yes, this is the only, this is the only place it could come out. They only point to one of these slides as when answering what are all the places it could come out. Okay, so about 50% of them clearly have access to the modal concepts because they are able to quantify over the possibilities. But again, this is 50%. And now after that, if you ask them the have to question again, now performance is much better. So you scaffolded this with a quantificational one and gotten rid of the problems. But the conclusion here is that there is evidence that children are only beginning to represent the modal language at age 4, which is when they're beginning to solve the behavioral task that draws on modal concepts. Okay. So what I want to argue is that these data altogether support the view that this option B there, constrained search with representation of goal and elimination of an option, no deductive certainty, no premise involving or, and no representation of modal concepts until beginning at age 4. Okay. Roadmap. So I've given you what representations I think are underlying the behavior on these particular tasks. And now I'm going to quickly show you that children do not draw on the representations of the negation operator needed for option elimination until ages 17 to 19 months. And that just is the call 2-cup task. And I showed you that the behavior I showed you before was there's an informative failure that you could have here. You could have a constrained search space. You could have a positive representation of the goal. And you just keep searching until you find a match to the goal. This involves a positive premise at all, positive representation only, and it does not involve any option elimination. But if it doesn't involve option elimination, there's nothing to prevent you from searching where you've already searched before. That's the informative signature. You search only in the cups, but you search in the cup just shown to be empty frequently. And this is not a result of the last one touched or anything like that. Okay, and that's the behavior we get at 15 months. 15-month-olds choose 50-50 between the 2 cups after having been shown that one is empty. She's handled both cups, and there's no relation to which one they choose, to which one is touched first or second, but they're just failing to eliminate the option, where 17-month-olds are eliminating the option. And again, you want to rule out deflationary alternatives I'm going to skip how we did this. We showed that they remembered what happened. They were motivated to get the task, and they were not confused by the showing them one empty and one forward, because if they had a reason to know which object it had gone, well, I'll show you the way that they could know it.
There we go. Okay, you ready? Look where it's going.
Okay, she just separates it before she puts them in, right? And then,
Okay, look at this. And look at this.
okay,
Where's the dog? Can you find the dog?
okay. So 15-month-olds are fine with that, but they're, of course, they didn't have to eliminate an option there. They had a positive representation to start with. Okay. I want to end with one other data point. The Piagetian invisible displacement task, as Joseph pointed out, has the same structure. And the age of success of that is exactly the same as the age of success on the simple 2-cup tasks, namely 17 or 18 months. And there's beautiful work from the 70s showing that the age of success on this task is specifically correlated with having a linguistic marker of empty, namely all gone. So children who produce all gone succeed on this task if they're 17 and 18 months, and ones that don't. Whereas there are other linguistic markers that predict selectively other Piagetian tasks, right? So it's specific. And also, this is the age where children learn the meaning of the word not, right, as well. Okay, so that's just one other data point. Okay, conclusions. Failure to find evidence for deductive certainty, propositions joined by or representations of possibility necessary until after age 3. Failure to find evidence for optional elimination based on not until 17. So how do we resolve these tasks with the successes like the successes that Luca presented in his task? Well, one possibility is successes in infancy do reflect logical reasoning dependent on logically structured thought, and the failures are due to performance demands. Resolution 2, the failures at the exclusion inferences until age 17 months and representing disjunction or marking possibility as such until age 4 or higher support the leaner interpretations of the infant successes and interpretations, that is, interpretations with no symbolic representations of not or possible. And resolution 3, which I think is certainly the case, is that the animal and successes reflect implicit precursors. Susanna Eladi raised this possibility, or protological versions of the logical operators or not and possible. Now, I've actually laid out what those might look like. So a minimal representation of possibility is in some sense a representation of possibility, but it doesn't support one piece of the logical work of possibility, which is to allow for two mutually exclusive versions of a given state of affairs. And similarly, constraining a choice space is a protological version of OR. It's part of the work that OR does. I think attentional mechanisms are doing this, but it's not. It doesn't have all the logical functions of OR. So I absolutely agree that there are implicit precursors to logical functions that play a role in thought. However, if evidence in favor of such accounts is found, and that's what I've tried to offer you today, the mystery will be to specify a mechanism through which the logical versions come into being. Okay. And the questions for discussion, but I've left no time for discussion, I'm sorry, is why do 15-month-olds fail on calls tasks where animals of many species succeed? And also, what's the relation between mastering the language of negation and possibilities and coming to use these concepts in action planning? So I just want to thank you once again for choosing me as the recipient of the Bartlett Prize. I'm honored. And I want to thank the symposiasts for, I was just rapt during the entire set of presentations earlier today. So thank you very much.
Thank you for the spellbinding Bartlett lecture. You're right, we don't have a great deal of time, but on the other hand, it would be a shame not to have some discussion if people want to stay for it, unless Heather wants to then stop.
I would love to engage
So
discussion.
let's have a few questions at least, and as always today, you can either type questions into the Q&A, or you can raise your hand and we will try to select you. So we have a question from Visually Zebra.
Hi, Sue. So here is a fourth kind of resolution of the conflict between the Lucas data and your data. Perhaps the issue is that whether infants can set up a symbolic representation of the situation. In your situation, they are confronted with real world alternatives, and they may not set up a symbolic representation of that, and that's the issue. In Lucas' setup, they are actually presented with a symbolic representation of states of affairs. They are external symbolic representations of them. So logical.
Well, so that would.
Yeah. Okay. So
I mean.
What time? Yeah.
Yeah. So that could be easily tested. You just do the situation in real life, and it shouldn't work anymore if that's necessary and sufficient. So I actually I don't think that the child is aware that those images are symbols, right? I mean, I think the child is processing them using the same representational mechanisms that they would if they were real things. I mean, I think it's I completely agree with you that they can be induced to take an object to be a symbol for something else, but I think it needs to be shown that they're actually doing that in that task. But I actually think that the low level interpretation of that task is one that in which they're maintaining a representation of the snake and the ball in the form of a working memory model of that initial event, and simply waiting until they have information. They're not wondering, is that thing in the cup a ball or a snake? But they're just, it's hidden. There's an object there, but it's still hidden. They have no information to line up what they're seeing with this working memory model. So they are holding something in memory, that is for sure, right? But what they're holding in memory is simply a positive object file representation of the objects in the scene. And so I would predict you would get exactly the same results if it was done with real objects, right? So I don't think that but this is an empirical question, and
yes, it is.
Yeah.
Okay, we have another question from Luca Banati.
There it is. Okay, I was not able to unmute. Can you hear me now? Yes?
Hmm? Yeah.
Obviously, this is all very beautiful and very powerful. So that's great. And I don't have an answer because I need to think about this stuff a lot. Nevertheless, there are some other differences that I wanted to to ask you if you think they are relevant or not within the tasks that we've been trying to use and the tasks that we've been using. The number one difference is that ours is not a decision task. And we know by several streams of literature that action planning and realization of actions really not necessarily informed by the mental representation that infants and children make since the A non B task. And I was wondering if you think that this could be one factor. The second one that is there, which is an important difference, I think, although I think you have a lot of control, so I don't push it very much, is that our task is inherently simpler, visually and everything. So every kind of ambiguity is all there in that cup where something is hidden, as opposed to being spread across 4 or 3 cups. Now, I don't know whether this counts. My first question is really the one that I'm more interested in. It is also an empirical question that can be solved. So the question is, do you think that there is anything special in decision as opposed to representation, or you would discard this possibility?
So I think yes, I actually know that it's a truism that looking time measures give you evidence for representational structure that action representations do not. However, that's actually not true when the representations are object file representations. So for example, in the object individuation work of Fei-Shu, the Fei-Shu and I and Bailargian and Wilcox and lots of other people, you get exactly the same developmental picture. If it's the bucket choice task, which is an action planning task, the reach into the box task, which is an action planning task, and looking time violation of expectancy measures. The same age, the same distinctions are drawing the same interest in both of them. Also, the bucket choice tasks of Lisa Feigenson. So these are the tasks where you have 2 buckets and you put 3 crackers in one and 2 crackers in the other. Those involve 5 objects distributed across 2 different sets, and 10-month-olds reliably choose the bucket with more thing. And you know that it's being underlain by working memory, because if you just make one of the sets 4, which exceeds baby's working memory capacity, they have a catastrophic failure. But here, it's one object in two containers. What's the working memory demand? Your task involves incredible working memory demands. They have to remember the premises if you're doing what you're saying. They have to remember it's either the snake or the cup. And then they have to work on that. They have to update that representation upon seeing the snake to cross out that the thing in the cup it's the same working memory demands, right?
Well,
right. But it's not about action planning, but it's the same working memory demands, and it's certainly no more.
No, I think that for sure they have to remember, but I think that I would tend to say that that's undisputable. If you show at this age, right, 12 months that we test, you put an apple and a pear, a snake and a ball behind the screen, they're going to remember that there are a snake and a ball behind the screen. So that's
no, I agree with that. No. I know that. That's what I'm saying. They do remember. What I'm saying is they don't set up the premise. This particular one is an apple or a pear, right?
Yeah,
but if they did, they would be happy to hold that in working memory, right? So that that is, they have to transform the working memory representation they have of the actual objects behind the screen into that one that represents possibly A and possibly B, or A or B. And that is
But they can't see
being
you.
done.
Okay, there we
Yeah.
have our representative. We can ask him.
Yeah, yeah.
And instead of asking him, maybe have a couple of questions in the Q&A. The first from Carolyn Patterson. I appreciated your comment about the relation between the choice behavior that indicates knowing what's empty and verbally knowing all gone. Can you give more examples or say more about this relationship?
Yeah, so this is there was this flurry of experiments. I mean, that's exactly the next step. I mean, what I've just shown you is that the age of success at each of these milestones, these transitions, 15 to 17 months or so, and then the one starting at age 4, is correlated with the adult interpretation of the language. That doesn't tell you anything about the relationship between those developments, or even that they are related within the same child. So these other experiments simply showed, they went a step forward and showed it was the same children at the point where kids are beginning to pass these Piagetian invisible displacement tasks, which are just location disambiguation tasks, like the call cup task, that it's the same children who are saying all gone, who are the children who are succeeding at it. So just a correlational study. It's not, doesn't tell you any more. I mean, it goes beyond, it's just this, it's the same age. That's all I have, right? But it only says these are correlated. That leaves open, you know, as always, the 3 possibilities. You need the conceptual, there's some kind of conceptual change, maturational or learning driven or something, that allows you to learn the language, or learning the language plays some causal role in making the logical concepts available to you. So I agree with Luca, for people who were at the earlier talk, that there is incredible innate support for very rich logic that is needed to learn language. The hypothesis that I'm entertaining is that that support is part of the language acquisition mechanism, right? And it's not available in non-linguistic thought, either in animals or pre-verbal infants, until it gets until it's getting integrated with the symbolic representations. So I agree with you, Gergo, that the symbolic representations are going to be probably, I mean, this is just wild speculation, the workspace in which you analyze the language, right? So it's possible that the language learning is playing a role in making these concepts available to action planning, right? And other reflections of it. Or there's some third thing that explains the development change in both. And to do those studies, nobody has done them, and it wasn't done in the infant study, in the infant literature either. What was done in the infant literature is that other verbal things that come in around 17 or 18 months, like saying "uh-oh" when you've made a mistake, or when you've tried something and failed, that is correlated with Piagetian measures of means ends behavior, but not with stage 6 object permanence, and vice versa. So it's a specific relation to language. That's as far as, it's a very, very pretty literature, but it never got taken further to ask, well, what actually is the relation? Is the language awaiting a conceptual development? Is the language learning contributing to a conceptual development? Or is there some third explanation for these things? Nobody did the huge individual different studies that you would have to do to really try to, and no one even had any hypotheses to test with them, right? So So it's just, but it's more than the very vague thing that I showed you, that the analysis of the modal language is happening over the same time that these nonverbal tasks are changing.
Well, thank you. This has been a fascinating discussion. There are more people waiting to ask questions, but I think it's perhaps time for us to let you go now. And thank you again for giving this delightful Bartlett lecture. Thoroughly enjoyable. And indeed, thank you to everybody who stayed to the end of this long day.
Yeah.
Let's hope the next EPS meeting may be live.
Yes, I'm really sorry that this one wasn't. And again, thank you so much for having me.
It was our pleasure.